Okay, question number 5 is a little more difficult. The average depth of water at the end of a dock is 6 feet. This varies 2 feet in both directions with the tide. Suppose there is a high tide at 4 a.m. If the tide goes from low to high every 6 hours, write a cosine function describing the depth of the water as a function of time, with t equals 4 corresponding to 4 a.m. At what 2 times within one cycle is the tide at a depth of 5 feet? Okay, so we're looking for a cosine function here. So first, I am given that my high point is at 4 a.m. And then it has that period going to the low point at every 6 hours. So at 10 a.m., I have a low tide. Then it goes back up to my high tide at 16. So the difference between 8 and 6 here, so I know my midline is 6. The difference is 2, so my amplitude is 2. My period I can find, so I know that 16 minus 4 gives me 12. So my period is 2 pi over b equals 12. Solving this for b, I get b equals pi over 6. So we'll hold off on the phase shift real quick, and then d, which is my vertical shift, which is 6 also. So going over here, let's find my cosine function. So I have y equals 2, so cosine starts with a maximum. So I have a phase shift of 4, which is c. So I have y equals 2 cosine of pi over 6 times t minus 4 plus 6. So with this problem, it wants to know at what 2 times within one cycle is the tide at a depth of 5 feet. So we have to solve this for t now. So I'm plugging in 5 for y because that's my depth here. And now I need to solve this. So let's add 6 to both sides, or subtract 6 to both sides. So I get negative 1/2 equals 2 cosine of pi over 6 times t minus 4. Divide both sides by 2. So now I have to get rid of this cosine. But cosine of pi over 6, if you look at your unit circle, okay, that's 30. So I'm going to plug in 30 here. So I have cosine of 30 times t minus 4 equals cosine inverse of negative 1/2. So what happens is these cancel. So I have 30 times t minus 4 equals 120, or 30 times t minus 4 equals 240. So here's the tricky part. Where does this 120 and 240 come from? So I'm looking at the cosine inverse of negative 1/2. So the cosine inverse of negative 1/2, let's look at our unit circle. Cosine is your x value. So if we're looking for the inverse, we're looking for our radian measure, or our degree measure, I'm sorry. So if it's cosine inverse of negative 1/2, let's find negative 1/2. Okay, well here's cosine of negative 1/2, that's 120 degrees. Let's see, negative 1/2 here gives me 240 degrees. So those are my only options, but I have 2 of those. So then I solve these for t. So then we get 30t equals 240, divide both sides by 30, and we get t equals 8, which is 8 a.m. Doing the same thing here, we solve for t, and we get t equals 12, which is 12 p.m.